If only she'd just agreed to move into a retirement home without making a fuss. Those words didn't come from a stranger. No, they came from my own daughter-in-law's lips. And standing right next to her was my only son, the boy I'd raised for nearly 40 years, staring at the floor in dead silence. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity. So, this is it. I'm not part of this family anymore. I didn't cry. I didn't blame anyone. I simply opened calmly, as always, the small purse I have carried everywhere for decades. From it, I took out the bank book I've protected for so many years, never letting anyone else even know it existed. There's about 1,300,000 in this account. I'm ready to leave every penny to whoever truly cherishes me. The room became so quiet, I could hear the refrigerator hum. And right then, in my heart, I made a decision. Life is like a chessboard, isn't it? Now, for once, it's my move. Now, I'd go for checkmate. Hello, my name is Evelyn. I just turned 78 this year. People say, these are your golden years, a time to slow down, enjoy the rewards of a life well lived. But for me, growing old felt more like standing still as your world shrinks, where shadows last longer than the light, and your greatest fear is just disappearing, unseen and unnoticed, from the people who ought to mean the most. For almost 40 years, I worked as head nurse at a small clinic outside Albany, New York. I never thought of myself as brilliant or gifted, just someone steady and stubborn, the type who always picked up the extra shift when someone called out, who stayed late and came in early, who did the little things that keep life steady for a family, even if no one noticed. I had dreams once. I wanted to fly to California, see the redwoods, walk through New England in the autumn, maybe wear a fancy dress to the town's July 4th fireworks. But I packed all those dreams away, always for my family. Always, always for them. I married at 22. My husband, William, was an engineer, honest and gentle, a steady man, never quick with words, but always solid as a rock. We weren't rich, but we scraped by. We had just one child, a boy we named Michael. But when Michael was 5, William died in an accident at a construction site. Scaffolding gave way, and just like that, my world turned inside out. I was only 45, and losing him was like falling straight down a bottomless well. I first learned, at that moment, the real weight of the word despair. But back then, I didn't have time to fall apart. I had Michael, a little boy who needed me to keep him safe and warm and fed, no matter what it took. I worked days and nights, holidays and Sundays. I was terrified of poverty, terrified of letting my boy down, of making him go without things the other kids had. Every paycheck, I divided the money 3 ways. One share for bills and groceries, one for Michael's school fund college someday if God willed it, and the last share I kept in a secret bank account for emergencies. Not once did I ever touch it for myself. Michael was a good kid. Studious, polite, never one for trouble, never touched a cigarette, always in by curfew. I was as proud as a mother could be, even if I didn't say it out loud. The day Michael got a full scholarship to state, he was so happy he cried. He came to me and, voice shaking, said, "Mom, please, stop working all those graveyard shifts. I want you strong and healthy. I want you at my graduation." That's when I thought, this boy will never abandon me. Not my Michael. Michael went to college, then landed a job with a construction firm in Albany. Later, he met a woman who worked at a bank. Her name was Susan. She was steady, sharp. Everyone said she was modern and bright. Thought, at last, one I can trust. Finally, my son's building his own home. But that was where things quietly, bit by bit, started changing. It was small things at first. "Mrs. Johnson, let me take care of the dishes. You must be tired. Sometimes, the soup's a little salty, but don't worry. I'll fix it next time." I tried to follow her advice. I'm getting up there in years. Guess I have to adjust, I told myself. Then one day, Michael said, "Mom, we just bought a bigger house. Wouldn't it be nice if we all lived together?" I was delighted, nearly in tears with gratitude. Finally, Finally, I thought, we'd share dinner around our own table as a family again. But that hope turned out to be the turning of the lock, sealing me into a new kind of loneliness. The new house was beautiful. A big backyard with flower beds, a modern kitchen, plenty of light. But at dinner time, the dining table had only 2 chairs. My meals came after Michael and Susan had finished, on a tray, alone in the back room. My room was the old storage space. No windows. The light bulb flickered. No sign that someone else lived here. No family portrait. No armchair. Just my packed suitcase under the makeshift bed. Whenever Susan had company, she'd say this. This is the woman staying with us for now, kind of like a boarder. She's not really family. A boarder? My chest ached. I'd lived with them for 8 years. No one ever called me family. No one called me a housemate even. I was just passing through. Over time, I became the unpaid maid. Laundry, meals, picking up our grandson from after school. But if I made the slightest mistake, "Mom, times have changed," Susan would say, flat and bored. "You can't just do things the way you used to." Michael? Always silent. I didn't need him to defend me. I just wanted, once, for him to glance up and meet my gaze. Just once, to give me a nod, to let me know I wasn't invisible in my only son's house. More than once, I thought. Maybe I'll stick it out a few more years, maybe when I go, they'll put my picture up on the mantle, remember that I existed at all. But the greater fear was disappearing before anyone noticed. To die alone, and have no one even realize I was gone. One day I came down with a fever 103 degrees. I called out again and again from bed, shivering. No one came. Michael was away on a job. Susan was in an all-day Zoom call. My grandson was in his room, headphones on, eyes glued to an Xbox. I lay there and cried alone, clutching a hand towel to my chest. After that, I started writing my will, not for the money, just to prepare. In case I died alone, and they needed instructions on what to do with my body. But the worst was yet to come. True hell began with one phone call, a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. That's when I learned I really was just a burden to them, something they'd rather do without. One crisp autumn morning, I bundled up for my usual trip to the community market. I stopped at the Food Lion for tofu, baby bok choy, and a half-dozen eggs. While picking through carrots at the vegetable aisle, I glanced up and saw Susan standing near the bakery, her back turned but her voice unmistakable. She was on the phone, her voice low, ice cold, every word a dagger. My mother-in-law's starting to lose it. Honestly, we should hurry and get this over with. The longer we drag our feet, the harder it'll get for us. The word, "get this over with," echoed in my head. I dropped the carrots before I even realized it, standing rigid, barely able to breathe. Get this over with? Are they going to ship me away? Throw me out with the trash? Or something worse? I don't remember how many lights I crossed getting home, or even what I bought. The wind felt sharp as glass on my cheeks, but I couldn't feel anything beyond the hollow inside me. By the time I reached the doorstep, my hands and feet were trembling. I wanted to sink to my knees and sob, right there, out in the open, but I swallowed it all, put on my apron, and started supper like nothing was wrong. Because I knew, once you're old and you discover an ugly secret, you're not forgiven. You're simply not safe. 2 nights later, at dinner, Susan slipped a pamphlet onto the table. "I just happened to see this at CVS today. A new retirement community opened up. Looks like they've got private rooms, not bad amenities either. A place for the elderly, a step away from everything you know. Out of sight, out of mind." And so, my story. The story of so many mothers reaches its crossroads. Whose move is it now? And what comes next, in a life spent giving? In a house that's not a home, when all you want is a chair at the table, a nod of recognition, and, for someone? Anyone to remember, you were here. Michael lifted his eyes for only a second, then quickly dropped his gaze again. I forced down another mouthful of fish, dry as dust in my throat. It stuck, bitter and stubborn, refusing to go down easily. Just a coincidence, they'd say. It was just by chance, Susan might add, like it was a dropped shopping list or a catalog that wound up where it shouldn't. But I'm not so naive now. I know better than to fall for accidents. At my age, I've lived long enough to spot what's planned, as plain as if it was written on their faces. After that day, things began showing up everywhere on the kitchen counter, the living room coffee table, by my spot at the patio table. A new kind of clutter, and always the same, retirement home brochures. At first, they were just cheap black and white photocopies, boring, impersonal. But over the weeks, they got fancier. Full color envelopes with staged pictures, beaming nurses, immaculate private rooms, spring green lawns, and beds piled like snowdrifts with pillows. First month free, scrawled in bold, happy letters. I said nothing, not a word. I just picked up each and every pamphlet, folded them neatly, and carried them quietly to my room. It felt like collecting little blades thrown at my face, pretending they were harmless slips of paper. One late afternoon, with winter nearly on us and the sun already fading behind the pines, I sat out on the back porch, towel on my shoulders, drying my hair in the chilly air. That's when Mrs. Bennet came over. She's lived across the street for more than 20 years now, managing on her own since her husband passed away and her daughter moved overseas. Though Jack Bennet was long gone by then. As for their daughter, last I'd heard she'd married and settled in Australia. Still, Mrs. Bennet was always composed, sharp as ever, a straight-talking kind of woman. She arrived that day carrying a glass jar of homemade candied plums, her specialty, sweet and bright and tart as good memories. She caught my eye, let out a sigh, and said, "Family again? Evelyn? You keep so quiet. Everyone's starting to think you just can't speak up for yourself." I laughed, though it was a brittle, unnatural sound. Mrs. Bennet tapped her mug and spoke, her voice quiet as a late autumn breeze. "If you got money, don't show it. Listen, you might feel poor some days, but I'll tell you something. You get old with empty pockets, and people treat you like baggage. But old folks with a little stashed away, suddenly you're a retired ma'am." Folks step a bit lighter, watch their tone. I almost answered. I wanted to say, "No, that's not true," but the words never came. Because I have a secret. One nobody knows. That bank statement. I'm not so old, my mind's slipping. Even now I remember every deposit, when, how much, why. Since 1995, I'd set aside about $210 a month, sometimes a little more as the years ticked on. Even when I fell ill, even for Michael's wedding, I didn't touch a cent. Not a dime. That money was my lifeline, my hope, my anchor. From that evening with Mrs. Payars of Bocals Bennet on, I started watching things with a cooler eye. Susan gave up on hiding her intentions. She grew bold, dropping remarks about the bills, the price of groceries, the spike in the electricity bill. "Power bill's really high this month, Mom. Mom, are you spending extra time in the bath? Looks like we're going through rice fast. Is it because you're home for lunch every day?" Her tone never sharp, all soft manners, but the words, knives, each one. So I began a diary. Every day, I wrote down what everyone said, what they did, not for sympathy, and not to tattle, for myself. So I'd never forget how they made me feel, how I was treated, and every day I checked my bank book, just to make sure it was still there, in its hiding spot tucked just behind Michael and Susan's wedding photo in my room. Bitter, isn't it? The very picture of their happiest day now, just a marker for the one thing that kept me safe. That room, with that photo, had become the most honest symbol of my cast-out happiness. One afternoon, when a gray drizzle hung over the neighborhood, I asked Michael a question. It was a test. My voice steady, polite. "If I ever said I wanted to leave this house, Michael, would you be sad?" He looked startled for a moment. Just for a moment. Then he replied, "Oh, Mom, don't talk that way. You should just choose whatever's most comfortable for you. We want you happy, that's all." Ooh, such gentle words. But I heard the truth buried under them. "It doesn't really matter, Mom. Mom, stay or go." It's all the same to us. In that moment, what I'd tried to deny became a certainty. They don't care. Not in the way I'd hoped, not like family should. But I didn't say anything out loud. I kept on, business as usual, morning coffee, dinner prep, folding laundry, feeding the birds, because I was waiting. I was waiting for them to reveal themselves, their true nature, to show me openly who they had really become. And when that day finally comes, I won't just leave quietly, sneaking out the back. No. I'll walk out the front door with my head held high, and I'll know I am not a burden, not trash to be carted away. I'll know my worth. And this time, the choice will truly be mine. That night, a gentle drizzle fell over the quiet streets. It sounded like a hush, brushing soft against rooftops and maple trees, hiding the world in a gauzy lull. I had just finished tidying the kitchen, a routine so practiced by now, I could do it with my eyes closed. I set the last dish in the rack, wiped my hands, and turned to switch off the light. That's when I heard Susan's voice, steady, even, and cold as a January creek. "Evelyn, do you have a second? Could you come here?" She didn't shout, didn't whisper, just called in a way that sent a sharp chill prickling down my spine. Michael was by the dining table, wrapped both hands around a mug of steaming tea. He didn't even sip. Instead, he seemed to stare right through the scratched-up pine floor, searching for some place to hide from the reality seeping slowly into the room. Susan, ramrod straight in her chair, held a thick folder paper stacked and clipped and organized. I recognized the brightly colored flyer peeking out. Magnolia Acres Senior Community. The same pamphlet that had started showing up lately on the coffee table, in my mail pile, tucked by my seat after dinner. Susan kept her voice light, like she was suggesting a neighborhood walk. "We've already finished the application process for you, Evelyn. Next week you'll be able to move in." To her, it was the offer of a vacation. To me, it felt like a final sentence, like someone quietly telling you, "You're no longer wanted here." I sank into the nearest chair, doing my best to hide the way my hands had turned to ice. Steam still clung in coils above my cup, but the heat no longer reached me. "Why?" I said, my voice coming out softer than I meant, but steadier than I feared. I looked Susan straight in the eye. She didn't flinch. She didn't offer a smile or look away. The warmth she'd once had, back when she first joined our family, was gone. All I saw on her face was a kind of calculation, someone clearing out what she couldn't carry, ready to offload her baggage for good. I glanced over at Michael, my son, my only child, the boy I'd held through endless sleepless nights and whispered comfort to when dark dreams frightened him. I waited for him to protest, to jump up and say, "Let's talk this through," or even just to squeeze my hand. One word, one shred of conscience. But he sat there, hunched and silent, fingers white-knuckled and locked together over his knees, as if he were bracing for punishment he couldn't escape. Quietly, voice trembling, not from fear but ache, I asked, "Michael, was I really such a problem for you both?" At that, Susan lifted her chin and, in a voice as flat as any court verdict, replied, "It's not a problem, Evelyn. It's a burden. A burden." That word hit like thunder, loud and final, echoing through the room and leaving nothing but ruin in its rumble. All at once, every memory I cherished, nights rocking baby Michael to sleep, the years of back-breaking overtime to pay his college tuition, the sacrifices for a ring when he fell in love, cracked and broke, sliding away with a crash. Everything beautiful, gone shattered in a moment by the coldness sitting across from me at that table. Turns out, to them, I was just old cargo, something to store away, clear out, or maybe simply toss in the attic with other things they no longer wanted. No one reached for me. No one said, "Wait, let's talk more." No one uttered a word. I stood and walked, slow and silent, back to my room, every step swallowed by the softness of the carpet. Outside, the rain thickened, drumming harder on the glass. I sat at the window seat beside my bed, pressing a faded family photo album close, old pages nearly falling free from their bindings. The first picture was of me 20-some, hair wild, exhausted and beaming, holding newborn Michael tight, circles cast deep beneath both eyes from sleepless nights. I ran a thumb along the grainy gloss, remembering the weight, the warmth, the certainty that I would give anything for him. Next, a 6-year-old Michael, palms together before William's grave, rain tracking down his cheeks. That boy had a look of heartbreak and courage I'd rarely seen since. Graduation day followed. A shot of me, grinning foolishly in a borrowed dress. So proud that I'd nearly burst. Then his wedding, a Christmas morning in front of a glowing tree, a summer in the park pushing my grandson in his stroller, my curls gone silver in the bright sunlight. Each forgotten picture was another proof of love evidence, page by page, of a life spent carving family out of luck and second chances. That night, I saw the truth. The smiles in those photos, the laughter, the hope. None of them meant that I belonged. In the present, the very people in those snapshots were ready to set me aside, haul me away as you take a trash bag to the curb, close the lid, and walk back inside without a backward glance. Sleep wouldn't come. I lay on my back, watching the play of shadows on the ceiling as rain and the ticking of the bedside clock measured the time in steady, hollow beats. I fought off tears, but they found me anyway, not for sorrow, but for sheer, ragged humiliation. My whole life I'd lived for someone else's happiness. To learn, after all these years, that I'd ended up as something to endure but never worth keeping, that was the greater heartbreak. At first light, I woke before anyone else. I went about my chores, the eggs, the dishes, the careful folding of my few clothes, each movement tinged with the knowledge that this was all a kind of goodbye. Michael left for work early, silent and hunched. Susan flashed her usual bright smile, her eyes colder than stone. I ate alone. Food didn't taste of anything. By mid-morning, I left for the park, the one where I'd watch my grandson, fed the ducks, carved initials in a tree as a kind of secret hope that something would last. I sat on a weathered bench, scrolling on my phone for any details about Magnolia Acres Senior Community. To be honest, the place didn't look bad. Wide halls, cheerful staff, a courtyard garden, every need provided. But it wasn't home, not home at all. On a whim, I stopped at a corner bookstore and bought a fresh spiral notebook. That night, I opened it, my hand nearly shaking, and wrote, Day 1. The day I was sent away. I wrote down every word, every avoided glance, every sharp-edged silence. Not so anyone else could read it, but because I needed to remember. Old folks forget, they say, but pain, the kind that settles in your ribs and won't ever go, never fades. A week out from moving, Susan brought in the official papers. She used a tone like speaking to a little girl. Gentle, reasonable, false. Just sign here, Evelyn, and we'll handle the rest for you. Wherever you want your things, just let us know. I took the forms, didn't answer. Neither yes nor no. I was still measuring, trying to see if some last bit of heart might turn the tide. But as the days wore on, it became clear. This was their final word. Michael grew quieter and quieter, rarely lifting his eyes to meet mine. One night, I brought him a warm cup of tea. He started like I'd caught him in some crime. I set the tea down, wordless, and turned to leave. But in the mirror, I caught a glimpse of his face, red-rimmed eyes, as if he'd been fighting tears of his own. Maybe there was still a scrap of decency in him, but his conscience wasn't strong enough to save me from the storm his silence had invited. I sat on the bed, next to my empty suitcase. I hadn't packed, not really, not because I was stubborn, just because you can't prepare your heart for this sort of thing. Not until the last minute. But for them, the countdown had already begun. Every meal, Susan brought up Magnolia Acres. Big private suite, caring staff, giant flat-screen TV so you can watch whatever you like. She painted a bright picture, and I nodded, fixed a small smile, pretended. I knew what they must be thinking. She's getting old, probably doesn't understand, just wants to please us. But they were wrong. I saw it, heard it all. And I waited for a time when I might have my say. Because I am not just someone's mother. Not just old Evelyn. That evening, after I finished the last pan and wiped down the counters, a job I'd done daily for nearly 8 years. I slid into a chair in the dim, quiet dining room. Outside, the rain let up. Inside, the storm in my chest went right on roaring. I found myself staring at the wall clock, the minute hand easing past the 12. Time for bed. But my eyes wouldn't close. All I could see, if I tried, was Michael's face, the son I'd raised, the man now unable to speak a word in my defense, sitting mute while his wife sent me away. Guilty, but unable to be brave. Regretting, but not enough to reach for my hand. I didn't want to dream. I didn't want to see his face in my sleep. Instead, I rose and slipped quietly to my old dresser. I opened the top drawer, reaching past sweaters no one else had ever touched. At the back, in a pale wooden box, was everything I hadn't let the world see. A few letters from William, brittle and faded, the handkerchief he'd carried until the day he died, and he knew, red envelope. It was nearly colorless now, worn with time and secrets. Inside was a single folded sheet, in William's careful hand. If life ever turns cruel, remember this. Even if the whole world turns away, you are still worth everything. I read the words again and again, pressing them close as if they could warm the air. No one had spoken to me like that in years. No one had called me precious or irreplaceable, but I needed to believe it, at least for tonight. I closed the box and placed it carefully back. When my fingers brushed the lip of the drawer, I froze, stopped cold, as if held by a new thought. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the time to stay silent. Not anymore. I strode to the wall where Michael and Susan's wedding photo had hung since the day they'd moved into this house. I traced the wooden frame, and from behind it, took out the small bank book I'd hidden there. Year after year, a record of every penny I'd saved, untouched and undamaged. Its cool cover almost hummed in my palm. In every story, there's a hidden card left to play. I held that book and looked long and hard at the smiling face of my son in the photograph, my pride and my heartbreak. I wondered if that man was still my Michael, or if, on his way to adulthood, he'd lost his roots and become a stranger. I walked out, careful not to make a sound, and stood on the dark porch. The night sky was a sheet of iron, no stars, no moon, only a heavy, smothering gray. It felt exactly like my heart, silent, watchful, waiting. But under that quiet, something burned, steady and sure, refusing to be snuffed out. And so, the night pressed on, and I sat alone by the quiet window, holding my notebook, holding my memories, holding the hope that maybe, even now, there was one more move to make. That morning, the sky was bright, as if the heavy rain from the night before had never happened. Sunlight poured through the bare branches, each reniously to struck the quote, glinting off every puddle left on the sidewalks. A crisp wind stirred beneath the porch overhang, carrying the scent of damp grass and the quiet chill of early December. The world itself was calm as a painting, steady, expectant, full of promise. But inside me, a storm was raging. Susan was up earlier than usual, already dressed in a neat navy dress and subtle makeup, her hair perfectly set. She moved briskly, placing her small rolling suitcase by the front door. When she turned my way, her smile was careful and practiced, polite, almost too polite. "Are you all set, Evelyn?" she asked, voice sweet but with a faint crackle underneath. "The taxi will be here any minute. The staff from Magnolia Acres said they'd be on site to handle paperwork, but if we get there first, things should go more smoothly." I nodded, silent. My heartbeat was steady and slow, but every thump rang out in my chest. I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a trip for pleasure. This was the moment my life would be measured and judged. Michael shuffled into the hallway minutes later. He hadn't gotten much sleep, his face was pale, and dark circles bruised the skin under his eyes. I could tell some part of him was gnawed by guilt, by the weight of his silence. Once, I would have clung to anger, but I didn't feel it anymore. No more anger, just a cold, bracing clarity. I carried a small handbag. Inside, I'd packed only a change of clothes, And one thing I'd never shown anyone, my old bank statement, tucked deep and safe. Over 30 years of savings, a quiet proof of my entire life. As I rolled my small suitcase into the hallway, I paused in front of the family photograph, a framed picture. Michael and Susan all smiles on their wedding day, laughing in a shower of petals. Just then, all the memories rushed in, the laughter echoing through a crowded kitchen. The nervous girl who once called me Mom in a shy, trembling voice, the sound of my grandson's feet thumping through the halls. So much life, crushed now into a single faded image. I forced myself to move on into the living room. The air was so tense, you could hear the ticking of the wall clock, each second loud as a drum. Susan sat, busy rechecking the appointment schedule on her phone. Michael hadn't said a word, his hands jammed in his pockets, eyes fixed on the carpet. I stood before them, drew a slow, long breath, and spoke with a calm that surprised even me. Before we go, there's just one thing I need to say. Both of them lifted their heads. Susan's brow tightened in suspicion. Michael's eyes flashed with a quick, nervous fear. I took out my bank statement, careful not to tremble, and held it up. In this account, I have just over $135,000. I'd checked the conversion. The sum was $135,000, not just a number, but 3 decades of my life in one neat line. Whoever treats me with honesty and kindness, whoever stays by my side, will inherit every cent in this account. For a moment, no one dared to breathe. Susan gaped, mouth hanging open, all the color draining from her face. Her eyes were wide, lips moving, but no sound came out. Michael's jaw dropped. He just stood there, stunned, totally speechless. "Mom, are you telling the truth?" Michael whispered. I nodded and set the paper on the coffee table, facing up so they could see the bold total at the top, 130,432. Zero. Susan's hand darted forward, an impulse to snatch it up, to check for herself. But I was faster, quietly withdrawing the page before she could touch it. I'd waited for this moment. I had rehearsed it in my mind, line by line. And now, there was no more hesitation inside me. "But the truth is, I don't need anyone to take care of me anymore," I said quietly, each syllable as firm as stone. "I'm grateful to you both. Because it's only thanks to you, I finally understand what people mean when they talk about real hearts." There was a beat of silence, then Susan's composure shattered, her voice rising sharp and explosive. "Did you ever once think about what this has done to me?" she cried. "Expenses went up, the place is crowded, our son's grades suffered, and I've paid the price for all of it. You think you're the only one hurting?" I cut in gently, but unfaltering. "Susan, you aren't a bad person. You've just gotten too practical." And then I added, softly but clearly, "But all that practicality cost you the most precious thing a person can have. Simple decency for your elders. No amount of realism is worth losing your heart for family." Michael's shoulders folded inward. He stared at the floor, hands shaking on his knees. He sat down heavily on the sofa, burying his face in his palms. I stepped close to him and softly rested a hand on his shoulder. "Michael, I'll never forget what you told me as a boy, no matter what. I'll look after you to the very end, Mom. I still remember every word. I'm not here to blame you. It breaks my heart, that's all. Sometimes, silence ruins what little is left between people. And that's exactly what's happened to us." Susan stood abruptly, her patience snapped, and yanked my suitcase toward the front door. "Fine. The reservation at the home is made. Whether you go or stay, that's up to you now. But I can't take on this whole family on my own anymore." I nodded. I understood. It wasn't anger I felt. What I felt was finally recognition, understanding. When hurt and disappointment outstrip reason, folks start thinking with their wallets, not their hearts. That was the lesson Susan had taught me. Money was the only language she trusted. The taxi pulled up outside. I rolled my suitcase outside and stepped onto the porch. Just before I left, I turned for one final look. Once, this had been my home. Now it was little more than an empty shell, stripped of laughter and hope. Straightening my back, I gripped the bank statement tight. I looked one last time at Michael and Susan, standing side by side in the doorway, and spoke, clear and sure, I'm leaving. Not because this facility is fancy, because any place without real warmth in the air isn't a place worth living in. And this account? I won't leave it in the hands of anyone whose heart has gone cold. Without another word, I turned and stepped into the waiting car. The driver glanced in the rear view. Magnolia Acres, ma'am? No, I said. Take me to Greenwood Park, right by St. Sesh. Patrick's Church. I'm changing my plans. The car rolled away, the house shrinking to a distant shadow in the mirror. I saw Susan saying something, her gestures sharp and frantic. Michael just stood there, silent, as if rooted to the ground, watching me leave. His face was white as paper, and I realized, right that second, their carefully ordered world was already falling apart. Where I'd go from there, I truly didn't know. But one thing was certain. Never again would I let anyone else dictate my life for me. My trump card. That bank account I'd guarded half my life, it hadn't bought me safety or love. But it had shown me who my family truly was. It was a mirror, revealing every shadow and flaw. That single figure, written in blue ink on a slip of paper, had stripped away all their pretense, their selfishness, their fear. Out the window, a last December breeze toyed with the hair at my temples. I closed my eyes and pulled in a deep breath. For the first time, I thought, I can still choose something for myself, and I promised, right then, no more looking back, no more living in fear. The taxi wound its way out of that narrow street, the path I'd walked every day, for 8 years. At the corner, I turned just once for a final glimpse. The old 3-story house, the porch crowded with planters I'd tended every morning, blurred and softened in the window's glass. Once, that house had meant home. I had believed, truly believed, I'd grow old in peace among children and grandchildren. But now, it was nothing but an empty vessel, just a box, packed tight with dreams, too sweet to last. I pressed my hand to my chest, my heart fluttered, slow but firm. And in my hand, the bank book I'd hidden all those years, no longer just a bank. Record, but a double-edged sword, reflecting all the hearts in that house. And in that quiet moment, as the car rolled past, I knew, there are some things time can't take. My own voice. My worth. It was my time now. My own life. My own choice. And this time, I'd see it through. No fear, no regrets. Not ever again. The very moment I saw it with my own eyes, every line between, good and greedy, honest and false, blazed clear as daylight. There, in that instant, it all came to light, who cherished me, who craved only what I could offer, and who saw me as just a burden. On my way toward Greenwood Park that afternoon, I asked the taxi driver to let down my window. The air outside came whipping in, cool and stinging against my cheeks. All the way down, that winter wind pressed sharp as worry onto my face, but I never rolled the window up again. It was as if that chill whispered a warning to me, wake up! Shake yourself free of this foolish hope. Looking back, I'd trusted too much in the word family. That thought settled in my chest like a stone as I gazed out, watching the leafless branches tremble against the pale sky. Bare, vulnerable, they seemed just like the life I'd led, shaken, exposed, waiting for a season that wouldn't come. The taxi rolled to a stop not far from the park gates. I stepped out slowly, my purse in hand, and turned to thank the driver. He glanced back at me, a woman his mother's age, alone with no clear plan for where she'd go. His eyes grew worried, his tone gentle. Ma'am, it's getting late. Are you sure you want to be out by yourself? You don't strike me as the kind of person who's got nowhere to go. I smiled, soft and small, the way you do when you're tired but at peace. I'm only now learning to find my place again, I told him quietly, after a long time being lost. He nodded. There was nothing more to say, so I watched him drive away, tires crunching softly across gravel. Then I moved to the biggest old ginkgo tree at the park's heart and took a seat, on a low wooden bench beneath its crooked branches. At my feet, Crisp golden brown leaves blanketed the ground. The air itself smelled of in-between of autumn hanging on, mingling with the promise of winter. It cut right through to the lonely corners of my chest. I reached into my purse and drew out a single sheet of fine white paper and a battered old fountain pen. How many years had it been since I sat down to write, not to my child, not to a friend, but to myself? My name is Evelyn. You are not worthless. You are not a burden. You have not loved too much, nor given too much of yourself to others. But maybe now, finally, it's time to love yourself as you have loved so many. So maybe nobody needs you these days? So what? If no one else stands by you, you must never walk away from yourself. Don't measure a lifetime by money, Evelyn, but please, never forget, real unconditional love is rare in this world. Most people love only under certain terms. That is the sad, stubborn truth of being human. I folded that letter carefully and tucked it into my wallet between the bills and coupons, alongside pictures of my late William and baby Michael. I drew a deep breath. At the far end of the park, an elderly couple ambled hand in hand along the walking path, voices raised in laughter. The sound found its way to me on the brisk, restless breeze. It was almost like music, like sunlight, warming my quiet, battered heart. I watched them as the city's lights began to come on. I sighed, not jealous, really. Just wistful, aching for what I thought might be my ending too. The part of me that had once believed, maybe I'll finish my days like that, peaceful, side by side with someone who understands the journey. Well, that part was still in there, weeping quiet tears I'd never let anyone see. Dusk drew in, slow and certain. I stood and brushed the leaves from my coat sleeves. And right there, sitting on that park bench in the half-light, a new idea planted itself in my mind. I wouldn't go back to that house. Not now. Not when every corner echoed with coldness, dismissal, and things left unsaid. That didn't mean I was running away. Not at all. No. It was time, finally, for me to define what my old age would be, not as a leftover or a castaway, but as a woman with wisdom, memory, and her own pulse, something strong and sure. The apartment I moved into was tiny, barely 300 square feet. It sat on the third floor of a faded brick walk-up near the edge of the park. From its single, narrow window, the golden ginkgo avenue of Greenwood Park shone like a river of sunlight when the evening came down. It wasn't much, not at all what most folks would call home. But for me, it was freedom's very threshold. It wasn't grand, and the rooms held no echo of children's laughter or the steady comfort of family meals. Still, for the first time in my life, I felt I was living just for me. This was my beginning. Each morning, I carried my canvas bag down to the city market. I bought a handful of potatoes, a bunch of Swiss chard, an apple or two, just enough. I cooked what little I needed, then read quietly, watered my spider plant, and sometimes sat on my narrow balcony for hours. I'd watch the neighbors pass below, mothers hurried with school bags, young couples late for work, a lost cat darting under a hedge. What kind of lives have you known? I wondered. What griefs and joys do you carry? Lonely? No, not quite. For the first time in over 40 years, I felt a kind of peace, quiet, unmoving peace that didn't rely on anyone else's approval. I could breathe and rest and know that I wasn't invisible. There were no sidelong glances, no kind words laced with poison. I had time just for myself. That's how the days unwound, one by one. And then, one soft Saturday, while I swept leaves from my side of the hallway, the buzzer rang. I wiped my hands, heart suddenly thudding. I opened the door, just a crack, and there stood Michael. His eyes were bloodshot, lids swollen. His shirt was wrinkled, like he hadn't changed in days. He clutched a small paper sack, knuckles white. He didn't speak, just stood there stuck, lost for where to begin. Just like the boy I used to comfort when nightmares drove him from his bed. I stepped aside and let him in without a word. He slumped into the wooden chair across from my tiny table. I fixed him some hot tea and set myself across from him. Silence filled the room. Not harsh, not awkward. A sort of shelter, maybe? A silence we both needed. And then Michael's tears began falling. Not a loud, childish sobbing, but a man's quiet grief, stifled and raw. Shoulders shaking, jaw firm, his shame and regret spilling out between sips of tea. Mom, I'm so sorry for all the things I didn't say, for how I let it happen, for every time I kept quiet. I'm sorry. Tears dripped onto the chipped surface of the table, growing into little pools I didn't wipe away. I didn't cry myself. I didn't reach out to hold him. I simply met his gaze, steady and sure, and asked quietly, when I burned with a fever for 3 days straight, who cooked rice soup and brought it to my bedside? When I couldn't find a spot at your party and ended up sitting in the hallway outside, who fetched a chair so I wouldn't be left out? When I sat up late those lonely nights, believing I was no longer needed, whoever noticed the old woman crying in the dark? Michael clenched his fists, bowing his head. His shame trembled deep as he pulled a single document from the paper bag. A divorce filing. He lay it flat on the table. Since you left, everything's come apart. Susan and I, we fought, again and again. She told me, if you had that kind of money, you should have left from the start. You're weak. You never seize your own chances. He took a shaky breath, his voice breaking. But, Mom, what she really wanted, all along, was your money. And all I ever wanted was just you. For a long moment, I looked at him. I didn't need to speak of right or wrong, not now. All I did was quietly stand, fetch an old handkerchief, and set it beside him on the worn tabletop. You never had to be the perfect son, Michael. Real courage is not in never failing, but noticing when you've hurt someone and making it right. But listen, I said it plainly, not harsh, not accusing. I can't give and give until there's nothing left of me. Those days are over. He looked at me then, eyes shadowed with regret. Forgiveness, I went on, isn't something you can buy, certainly not with money. And love isn't something paid for with tears. If you truly want a second chance, Michael, it starts here. Not with promises, not with speeches, but with what you do day by day. After that, he slowly, but surely, began to change. Not overnight. Not for show. He just tried, bit by bit, to walk back toward me. He brought my favorite sweets once in a while. He found the old book his father had loved, dusted and yellowed, and brought it for me to read again. He picked up my prescriptions, carried groceries to the top floor, and checked in, not out of duty but as a son. And piece by piece, we rebuilt something lost. Not the old life, not the illusion of being needed at any cost, but a way to say, I see you now. I know your worth. I understand what family is, finally, after all this time. That's all I'd ever wanted. And in that quiet understanding, at last, I found my peace. With those moments in hand, I visited again and again. I never spoke a word about the bank statement, not once. One afternoon, on my way back from a quick trip to the grocery store, I saw something that made me stop right in my tracks, a sight that felt almost like a trick of the light. Over at Maple Grove Senior Living, through a dusty window pane, I saw Michael. My Michael. He was wiping the windows carefully, the hem of his jeans flecked with suds and sunlight. For the briefest second, I thought I must be mistaken. Wonder. But no, there he was. My grown son. Just as he bent too far and the mop slipped out of his grip, tumbling onto the floor, he turned to the elderly woman by his side. He gave a deep, grateful bow, apologizing with an earnestness I hadn't seen in him for years. I stood there, without moving, and felt something gentle and warm rise in my chest, like the first true spring. Air after a hard winter. That night, when Michael came by to visit again, I asked him, simple and clear, "How long have you been working at Maple Grove, sweetheart?" He answered like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Since the day after I filed the divorce papers. Not just for you, Mom. I wanted to relearn what it means to be gentle with people. I needed to." I kept my back turned, washing the dinner plates, not daring to look up. But my hands, suddenly, were trembling. It wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was the shock of realizing my boy had finally truly grown up. A week later, he came by with a bundle of white chrysanthemums, fresh and still wet with dew. Without a word, he set them quietly on the kitchen table. "Today's Dad's anniversary, Mom. I want to be here with you. Just to say a prayer together." I just nodded. That was all, nothing more needed saying. That, by itself, said everything we'd been carrying inside. That night, in that small apartment, we burned a stick of incense quietly by the window. No fancy altar, no extravagant meal. 3 slender sticks of incense. 1 tiny bowl for rice. And 2 people, both a little battered, both hoping, maybe, to be a family again. I can't promise I'll forget everything. Scars on the heart take time. No apology wipes a life clean in a single sweep. I know that. But I do believe this much: I did not raise my son the wrong way. Life just took a bit longer to teach him what matters most. I don't hold a grudge against Susan either. Truly, I don't. The only thing left is a sorrow that's hard to name. Is a person's heart really something that changes this easily? Can affection turn brittle and cold so fast? But because of Susan, I finally realized something important. Getting older, no matter your age, is never a good enough reason for people to shove you out of their lives. On the night we marked William's anniversary, Michael didn't rush home when it was over. Instead, he sat on the worn wooden chair by the window, looking out at the moon filtering through the yellow leaves of the old ginkgo tree on the balcony. The moonlight wavered across the floor and made shifting patterns right at his feet. He gazed out quietly for a while, and then spoke in a voice so soft, I almost missed it. "Mom, do you remember how I used to do homework right here sometimes? Whenever I messed up a math problem, you'd slip a butterscotch on my desk and say, 'It's okay to make mistakes, honey. Fix it, and that'll be enough.'" "Oh," I smiled, holding back tears. Memory, glorious and terrible, surged through me, washing away the years, stringing together every moment we'd ever shared. Those damp spring nights when we read storybooks together. The sound of Michael's tiny voice at the hospital when he clung to my coat and begged, "Quit working the night shift, Mom. I'm scared for you." And now, in the quiet shape of the man in front of me, I saw an echo of that anxious, wide-eyed little boy, his hope and kindness still shining under the layers of pain and missteps. He'd been through struggle, sorrow, all the uncertainty this world hands to the unprepared. But that spark of kindness I tried so hard to plant, it hadn't died. It was only hidden by dust and wrong turns. With all the gentleness he could manage, Michael went on, "Mom, I know you're still holding on to your bank statement, but you don't need to, really. I don't want it. You can rest easy." He paused, voice husky. "All I want is this: to come home sometimes, share dinner at this tiny table, and listen to your stories about the old days. That's enough for me." There was nothing I could say. My eyes blurred with tears, and Michael's face swam out of focus. But I couldn't speak at all. That night, after he left, I stood before the bathroom mirror for a long, long while. A tired woman, hair now more silver than brown, gazed back at me. Wrinkles ran deep along her cheeks, and age had taken some light from her eyes. But inside those shadows, there was something else. A quiet certainty. I am not weak, I told myself. No matter what I'd lost, no matter how I'd been betrayed. I had survived loneliness, and I was still here, upright on my own 2 searching feet. I didn't need anyone else to decide my worth for me. And so, I went to my drawer, took out my old bank statement, and set it gently on the kitchen table. For the first time, I opened to the last blank page, and in quick, steady handwriting, I wrote in the note section, "It's not the clever ones who are rewarded, it's those who are willing to change." I didn't rush to forgive my boy, not right away. It didn't mean I'd lost my love for him, but I knew better now. Saying you regret something is easy. Real change takes time, no matter how sincere the apology. Scars that come from years of dismissal and silence heal at their own pace. Not with promises, but patience. So, I looked at Michael one Sunday morning when he stopped by, and I told him, softly but without a trace of doubt. If you really want to make things right, Michael, love someone with all your heart, without expecting anything in return. Just as I tried to do, all those years. And he didn't argue. He didn't try to explain. He simply nodded, silent but steady. And that was when I knew. He was listening, perhaps for the first time, with no thought of reward. About a week passed. One afternoon, as I was carrying my groceries up the stairs, Mrs. Porrick, Bennett from across the street, stopped me on the landing. "Evelyn, your son? He's been volunteering at Maple Grove, hasn't he? He's there every week. No paycheck, just doing it because he wants to help." I lost my words for a moment, but inside my chest, hope flickered like the sun after a storm. After that, I simply watched. I didn't prod, didn't offer advice. Each time I walked past Maple Grove, I sometimes caught sight of him there, shoulders bent as he pushed an old man's wheelchair through the garden, or bowing his head in apology as he cleaned up spilled oatmeal. That was the Michael I'd prayed for, not anyone's son, not a hero, just a man starting from scratch, rebuilding himself one careful kindness at a time. Time drifted on, slow and gentle. By the next year, I was 79. I had more gray hair, and my eyesight wasn't so sharp anymore. But I felt lighter than ever. The old anxiety that I'd be thrown away, or that my only purpose was what I could do for others, was gone. I no longer expected anyone to owe me gratitude either. On my birthday, Michael arrived with a bag of sweet bean pastries, my favorite since childhood, and a tiny pot with a white chrysanthemum nestled inside. But this time, he brought something else, something utterly new, a small silver key. "I have something to show you, Mom," he said gently, holding out the key for my hand. I tilted my head, puzzled. He smiled and began, quietly but with more courage than I'd heard in years. "I bought back the house you used to love, the one you'd left behind. Not for me, Mom, but for you. I've been fixing it up, slow and steady, just the way you used to talk about. How you dreamed you'd spend your days. This isn't my house. It's yours. And if you can't forgive me, then I'll live downstairs as a guest. Not as the owner, not as a son expecting special favor, but as someone grateful just to share a roof again." I stood there, stunned, no words left, nothing but the sound of my heart beating slow and strong. For the longest time, I said nothing. Just stood, hands trembling, the key warming in my palm. The memory of worry and heartache ran through me all at once, but so did a light, trembling hope. This was not the life I planned, yet here it was, a life rebuilt, simple but honest, with enough room for forgiveness, enough time for understanding. I looked at Michael, my son, and saw someone I'd lost and found again. Not because of money, but because, at last, he'd remembered how to love without price. And as sunlight angled across the kitchen table, I realized, I am still here, and still alive. Not as someone's burden, not as invisible, but as myself. This was never the ending. It was my beginning. One more time. It wasn't the gift that surprised me. No. What caught me off guard was the first time, truly, the very first time, I saw something shift in my son, Michael. I sensed, right then, that at last he'd begun to grasp the difference between responsibility and love. He didn't try to press any kind of atonement on me, nor insist I do anything except what would make me feel at peace. He made no demand for making it up to each other, nor set conditions that I must try harder to earn a place. Instead, he simply and quietly did his best to honor my feelings as his mother. So, I set the key he'd given me down gently on the kitchen table. I didn't answer him right away. Instead, I took my time sitting with what had passed between us. The tiny silence after his words, the way sunlight fell softly through the window, warming both our hands. But then, 3 days later, I knew it was time. Without telling anyone, without a word to Susan or even Mrs. Bennett across the hall, I packed up my things. Quiet as the early morning, I set out, suitcase in hand, for that old house, the house I had once left behind in silence. That very day, In the thick quiet in which I'd once walked out, I found myself once again at its front steps. Now, for the first time, the door was open, not just for me to enter as a guest or as a burden, but to come home as the woman of the house, its rightful owner once more. I stepped inside. The entrance was clean, everything freshly swept. In the small front yard, a new flower bed shimmered with pale blue pansies and neat rows of spring tulips. In the living room, the big wedding photograph of Susan and Michael was gone. From the main wall, in its place, old pictures of William with Michael as a child, my two lost boys, and a dozen letters, all in wooden frames. I drew closer. Some were pages from Michael's diary scribbles and snatches of thought he'd written during his time working at the senior living facility. Others were letters addressed to me, letters full of regret, humility, and quiet apology. I let my suitcase slide to the kitchen floor, then settled myself into the big soft chair by the window. End of afternoon sun painted gold lines across the smooth wooden planks of the floor, and I let myself just breathe for a moment. Really breathe. It struck me with a kind of hush, right then. Going home. It isn't just a matter of returning to where you used to live. It's not about retracing your steps. Home is where, after all your wandering, you find yourself able once again to be who you really are, the place where you are known, not just accommodated. A week later, I made my way to the bank. And for the first time, after years of clutching that bank statement close, once my armor and my last-ditch shield, I opened up that account, not as a weapon, but as a door to the future. After interest, the total stood at a little over $135,000. On that day, I set up 2 new accounts. One was in Michael's name, but it was not a reward. It was a trust, a stepping stone. I placed $50,000 into his account and gave him a quiet, simple instruction. This money isn't for you to spend on yourself, Michael. I want you to use every penny for someone else. Anyone, but never for your own choosing. And the rest I put towards something William and I had once only whispered about in our poorest years, a small charitable foundation in William's honor. I called it the William Fund for Belated Joys. It was meant to support small, struggling elder care homes in our county. Every month, it would give a bit of dignity and hope to older folks who'd been left behind by the world. On the day the foundation was officially created, I brought Michael with me. We stood together before the little gathering of staff, local volunteers, and a few curious neighbors. My voice shook with nerves, but I spoke as clearly as I could. I'm not making this donation because I'm wealthy. That isn't it. I'm doing this because, for years, I was the kind of person whom no one ever bothered to ask, "Are you doing all right?" Not even once. So I want to make sure nobody else goes unseen. From the back of the small church hall, Michael dropped his gaze. I watched him quietly wipe away a tear. And right there, I realized something with a peace I'd never known. I no longer believe in children must always pay their parents back. I no longer find myself dreaming helplessly of a dutiful child and all the gratitude I should be owed. I live in reality now. People make mistakes, but people can change too. The question isn't, how will you pay me back? Or, what will you do for me? The real question is, how will you choose to live today, tomorrow, every day going forward? That, right there, is what gives a person their worth. Now, every morning, I wake in a bedroom that fills with golden sunlight. I am not anyone's live-in maid. I'm Evelyn Johnson, 79 years old, a woman who has at last learned to live for loving, to learn forgiveness, moment by moment, and, above all, to cherish herself. Most of all, I am proud I managed to find this peace before it was too late. I am a mother, a widow, a grandmother. Some called me a burden once. Now I'm just a woman, starting life over one sunrise at a time. You might think, starting again at this age, isn't it just too late? But here's what I want you to remember. There is no such thing as too late. What's truly frightening is being so afraid you never stand up at all. Once, I lived in a house where nobody even bothered to call my name. I did every chore for free, unnoticed, unseen, sometimes even resented. I know what it is to believe I am nothing more than an extra chair in the corner, someone just in the way. There were days I thought, wouldn't it be easier not to be around anymore? Yes, there were days like that. But now, every morning, I make myself just a little cup of tea and throw open the window to the wind. I open my diary, and with a steady hand, I write. Today as well, I lived for myself. This old house where I live is still full of chilly memories, the silence of my son, the coldness of his wife, all those years of hidden hurt and patience. Yet now, this house has become a place that welcomes me. A place to call home. The walls are adorned with new photos, me and Michael, laughing together on an April Saturday upstate, smiled all around at a senior home charity lunch, my beaming face as we cut the ribbon for our tiny lending library. I don't feel ashamed anymore, not for having a little money set aside. It's become a tool to fill my heart, not something I have to fear being snatched away by others. And Michael? He doesn't ask, "How much will you give me?" anymore. He only asks simple questions now. "Mom, did you have a good day? Are you warm enough? Are you tired? Want to get out for a walk?" Sometimes he comes empty-handed, but the gift is in his showing up, in his presence. And through that, I see how he is no longer just trying to make things right with me. He is trying to grow as a man. And I, for my part, honor that. Forgiveness doesn't rewrite the past. It just stops the past from ruling over today. I am not still burning with anger. Anger only hurts the one who carries it. There were times I could not forgive Susan. But in a strange way, I'm thankful for her. If not for what happened, I might never have stopped to reclaim my life. She was a mirror of society's voice, that unconscious belief that old folks are nothing but a burden. But I'll say this, we, the old ones, are the shoulders that held up this country and nurtured its future. We have carried infants, sweated chores, made sacrifice after sacrifice so the next generation could thrive. Even if our hair is white and our hands shake, even if our memories are fading, our value has not diminished. Aging doesn't erase worth. We're supposed to grow old quietly, they say. But no. I want to live these years making my own choices, raising my voice, claiming my space. I didn't tell this story to scold the young or beg anyone's sympathy. It's for those who are still silenced, who stay in their rooms day after day believing they have no right to be heard. If you are a mother, a father, a grandmother, or a grandfather, let me say it clearly. You have the right to speak. Getting old is not a mistake. There's nothing wrong with wanting dignity. If you're still young, if you're living under your parents' roof, or just unsure what to say, stop for a second and think. When was the last time you asked, "Mom, are you okay?" Is Dad just the bill payer now? Has the old person become invisible? Someone you used to hold hands with, who may now need your hand in return? I don't ask for a perfect family. But if you've read this far, I hope next time you glance just a little differently at that older person in your life. They aren't after your pocket money. They want your heart. They don't need a grand party, just a seat at your table and a place to be seen day after day. That, more than anything, is what makes a home. And that's what I wish for you, and for anyone who has ever felt pushed aside, unseen, or unheard. My life has been colored by all that I have lost, by betrayal, and by finding love only after so much time had passed. Yet through every last moment of it, I am grateful, because each hardship, each wound, each unexpected comfort has taught me what it means to live a life that truly matters. If you have stayed with me and read my story until now, perhaps you too carry your own burdens, deep and silent as mine once were. If you are a mother, a father, a grandparent, if you have ever felt unseen or overlooked by those you loved most, I hope you hear me. If you are a son or a daughter, and some regret gnaws at your chest, a word you wish you'd spoken, an apology you long to give, know you are not alone. Write it here, if you will. Just one line, a single realization, even a thought as small as a whisper. We do not have to keep quiet any longer. A person's worth is not measured by their age. It is measured by how much they have loved and how deeply they have been loved in return. Have you shared even a piece of my experience? Have you ever felt, no matter your age or role, that your presence no longer seemed to belong inside your own family's story? If you have the time and heart, please leave a comment. Let me and others hear your voice. I promise I will read it. If, in some way, this story touches your heart, please consider sharing it onward, because sometimes a single honest word can help mend a soul that's been left wounded and alone. My name is Evelyn, and I have chosen, even now, to step back into the light. What path will you choose? This is your moment too.